Today we're going to have a look at my Kenwood R5000 communications receiver, and anyone that's familiar with amateur radio transceivers over the years will recognise the, at least very least the general overall appearance of this receiver, because at a glance it's pretty much identical to the TS430 transceiver. Obviously it doesn't have a microphone socket, it has a headphone socket and a record socket here, but I'll find you a picture of a TS430 and you'll see that in appearance at any rate it's extremely similar. So here's the receiver. I've had this for a number of years, probably about 15 years, and it wasn't a new receiver then by any means. This is again 80s or late 1980s, I think, a radio. It was the top of the line Kenwood receiver in its day. It was quite an expensive one. It would have been in the same sort of price range as the Drake receivers, and possibly the NRD, the 525, which I've shown you previously. And this one still works very well. It does have a very slight issue. I think there's the memory backup battery in the radio has expired. I don't use the memory settings in it, so that's not an issue. Other than that, it works very well. Now we'll see the controls here. We have our power switch here. We have a button that says voice. I believe you could have a voice synthesizer for these receivers, which would read out the frequency. So very useful for blind or visually impaired people. There's a switch for switching in the timer facility, and a dimmer switch, obviously to dim the frequency display. We have two clocks built into the receiver, and you can switch clock 1, clock 2. And we can set an on time and off time, switch the radio on and off. And we set the time using that button. The keypad buttons here are used to switch modes. So we've got lower and upper sideband, CW, AM, FM. This radio has an FM narrow filter in, so it's suitable for 10 meters FM or citizens band FM listening. Very usefully, we also have an antenna switch, so we can potentially connect two antennas to this radio and switch between them. You'll notice above the keys are numbers. This keypad also doubles as a frequency entry keypad. Okay, so you can actually key in a frequency and go straight to that particular frequency. We have subsidiary buttons here for switching between memory and VFO. For scanning, again, switch between memory and VFO, enter a memory and clear a memory. And we have the other buttons here. These are used in the setting of the clock, the hour and minute. We can switch between two VFOs, A and B. We can lock the frequency dial, so turning the tuning knob won't have any impact on moving frequency. We can change the tuning step, and by pressing this button, VFO A and VFO B will have the same frequency in them. There's a button here marked HF VHF. These radios were available with a VHF converter. This radio doesn't have it fitted, but by pressing this you would switch in the VHF converter. And we have 1 megahertz up and down buttons here, so if you don't want to key in a frequency and you don't want to keep having to turn the tuning knob, you can step up in 1 megahertz steps using these buttons. We have a selectivity control here. If it's left in auto, it will switch a wider filter in for AM mode and a narrower for USB, LSB and CW. We can also select the narrow filter if we're in AM mode. We've got other settings here. There are optional filters available, and this switch would be switching in those filters. There are no additional filters fitted to this radio, so these settings don't have any effect. On the knob here we have, on the inner ring, we have a squelch control, which works in all modes. We have a notch control, which we switch in using the notch button down here. We have an IF shift control here, and a noise blanker level control on the inner. On the inner here we have the AF gain, the volume control, and on the outer we have RF gain. We have an additional switch here that will switch in attenuation of 10, 20 or 30 dBs if we've got a really strong signal. We can switch the AGC here between fast and slow, but we can't switch it off. As I said, that's the switch for the notch filter. We have 2 noise blankers we can switch in or out here. So let's take a look at the rear panel. Right, fairly simple rear panel on this radio. We've got a 3.5mm jack for the external speaker. We've got an accessory socket here. I'll put in the text just over this video of the main functions that this gives us. We have a remote socket here similarly. I think this may be for use in conjunction with a transmitter or a transceiver. Obviously we have the SO239 for our main antenna. And similar to many of the other receivers, we have options here to connect a wire antenna. But unlike many of the other receivers, we can have the 2 antennas. We could have an SO23, a PL259 plug-in here with an antenna. We could have a wire antenna on these, and we could switch between them using the front-mounted antenna switch. We've got a blank for a VHF antenna. If the converter was fitted, we'd have an SO239 here. Here's our 3-pin plug for the AC in, the mains lead. There's a blanking plate here, and I believe there was an optional kit whereby you could power the receiver from 12 volts, and if you fitted that you'd have a suitable connector here, but we've just got a blanking panel. So that's the rear panel of the R5000.